Presenting for tonight's Florida School Counselor Association webinar is Mrs. Grace Wilhelm, a school counselor with more than 20 years of experience at the elementary and middle school levels. She has presented for FISCA, ASCA, and at international schools overseas. Her presentations include play therapy, disaggregated data, RAMP, and stress management. She has been the Duval County School Counselor of the Year and was previously selected as an ASCA School Counselor of the Year semifinalist. In January of 2022, Grace represented Florida as our 2021 School Counselor of the Year for Florida. Grace has achieved National Board Certified Counselor status, received RAMP twice, and the DOE FDOE PTSA Parent Involvement Award. Her published works include Games and Play to Enhance Counseling and Teaching Strategies, Anger and Me, and Stress Busting. Also presenting tonight is our current Florida School Counselor of the Year for 2022, Mr. Joshua Nelson. Joshua is the counselor at Richard Lewis Brown Gifted and Talented Academy. He is a proud graduate of the University of North Florida, receiving his bachelor's degree in elementary education in 2009 and his master's degree in counselor education in 2016. He has worked in education for 13 years, spending 2010 through 2015 as an elementary teacher for 2nd through 4th grade and as an elementary school counselor from 2016 to present. As a teacher, he was Teacher of the Year at Annie R. Morgan Elementary and was a semifinalist for Duval Teacher of the Year in 2012. In 2017, he was the Teacher of the Year for R.L. Brown as the school counselor. In 2020, R.L. Brown became a RAMP school. In 2021, he was the Lucille Crisell School Counselor of the Year for Duval County Schools and the 2022 Florida School Counselor of the Year. Grace and Josh, you now have the floor.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction there. I am Josh Nelson, and Grace and I are looking forward tonight to walking you through phase 3 of RAMP Cultivating Your School Counseling Program. Grace and I had the opportunity of sharing with you about phase 1, where we took the time to share with you about surveys and doing your time reflections and putting together your mission and vision. And today we get the opportunity to share with you about how to reflect and use everything that you've done by using those surveys to create your school counseling program. So the objectives that we have for tonight are for us to talk about the calendars, your core lessons and results report, small group lessons and results report, closing the gap and results report, and reflections and school counseling advisory review. And today what we're going to do is we're going to share with you the work that we've done in our schools and what we used as we ramped our schools back in 2020, and also share with you some of our current practices that we've been using to give you examples of what you can do as school counselors to work towards the road to ramp. And the first piece that we're going to talk about tonight is calendars. And as we think about those calendars, what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time talking about the planning process, because I believe that the calendar is probably one of the most important pieces that we could use when it comes to school counseling. The importance of a calendar is it allows us to map out our year. It allows us to map out what we want to accomplish. It allows us to use those surveys that we've collected, the data that you've been reviewing and disaggregating, to then create your plan of action. So I'm going to start by having Grace share with us about how she plans using her calendar and the process that she uses, and then I'll share with you how I do the planning process. Grace?
All right, thank you, Josh. So I always start my calendar by reviewing the previous year's calendar, and I go through it and I see if there's any changes to be made, and that lists everything that I do every month. for the entire year. And then I will go through that. And there's my calendar for the 18-19 school year. And it's just by month, all of my duties and things that I'm doing in there for the whole month. And I'll go through that. And if anything has changed, I will delete it or add to it, or important things coming up. And it reminds me of things that I need to add to my calendar. And then I will take a calendar, a little booklet like this that has the months in it, where I can see months at 1 month at a time, like this. And I'll go through it. And I like to use color code. So here's some of my color coding here. Let's see. Right here, where I mark out everything in my calendar. Like if there's school test days, I'll mark those green, or in service is yellow. No school days, I mark blue. And ESC 504s or other non-counseling duties, ESOL meetings, I will mark in orange. And then I will, those days will be accounted for. Like, so here's one where it's marked out for an in-service, and this is marked out for pre-planning days. Of course, this is for August. And then I will put in my blocks, my weeks that I'm planning for. For example, this past school year, I blocked out time for Hispanic Heritage Week and Red Ribbon Week and Jacksonville Goes to College Week and some different things like that. So I know to plan for those in advance. So ASCA has a template that they want you to use now. Before, ASCA did not it didn't matter if you used a specific template or not, as long as you listed your activities by month in the example that was just shown. But now ASCA, if you're going for RAM, they do want you to use their templates. After I have everything monthly planned, yearly, and then monthly planned, I start working on my plans for the week, and I break that down even more, how my time is used hour by hour, where my small groups are, my individual counseling sessions, meetings, time to consult with teachers and parents. So all of that is then broken down. And I give a copy of my weekly schedule to my principal, to my assistant principal, and to the school receptionist. And those are people who might need to find me quickly, or if they know, they'll know how to get me, or where I am, or what I'm doing in the school on those days and the time. So that is an example of how I use the calendars and break it down so that it's clear for everybody what I'm doing.
Very good. And I use a similar process as Grace. One thing that when I think about planning is I think about um, as a school counselor, you almost have to be a year ahead of what you're working towards. So I'm now in the process of planning for next school year, as we've now are wrapping up this current school year. And one thing that I do is I think about having a focus of the classroom lessons that I'm going to be working on, and thinking about, well, what is it that my school needs? And I look at that by using the data, by using the surveys that my students have completed, that my teachers have completed, which then allows me to then begin to plan for that next school year. Because as Grace shared, is as school counselors, we have to know what we're planning to do and how we plan to carry that out. So for example, at my school in 2018-19, I did a whole unit. The whole year's focused on growth mindset. Then in 2019, 2020, one thing that I've learned is that as a school counselor, we have to be flexible sometimes. It was not my intention to have to move into talking about coping strategies and the leader in me providing students that extra boost. But when we went online and needed to have students feel confident in who they were, and knowing that things were going to work out and they needed some encouragement, I included that into my curricula for that year. And then after 2020, we moved into resiliency. So a whole year talking about how to be resilient. And this year, my focus has been new year, new you. And this has been helping the students understand about themselves, understanding their emotions, helping students understand what ways that they can control their emotions, how to work through problems, how to build friendships. And all this is based off of those surveys that we use and that we talked about last time. And then as we think about the previous year, we then plan for the next year. We think about our classroom lessons. We think about our small groups that we want to run. And we think about that individually counseling. What is it that our students are going to need to have success in the classroom? What is it that I want to do school wide? So thinking about the character traits of the month and thinking about, well, how am I going to deliver these character traits to every classroom and what method can I use? So, for example, for the last 2 years, once we got connected to online resources, I began doing some video lessons for students and for classrooms so that I could get in and I could share these character traits of the month with students in every classroom. And then what are my school-wide events? What is it that I want to do school-wide at the school and when do I want to do it? So again, I map each of those things out at the beginning of the school year. I'm sorry, at the end of the current school year in preparation for next school year. Then once I know my big plans, I then start my year. I then look at the yearly calendar, and this is similar to the template that we use that ASCA now that ASCA tells us to use as their template. This is the one that they had when I was ramping. So again, you have that ongoing services. What are the things that I'm going to continuously do throughout the course of time? Throughout the school year. And then you have the monthly breakdown. And the thing to notice is that core curricula piece, the individual planning, and the responsive services. You're going to put down what you're going to do in each of those, and then what you're going to do as far as indirect services and program and planning and school supports in each of those boxes. And one thing that we know is that things don't always go as planned. So it's all right on your school yearly calendar to go in and make adjustments. You see, this is in 2018, 19. We had some things go on that I needed to go in and make some corrections. So I just simply took and just crossed those things out because we weren't able to do some of the things I had planned to do. And when you do your ramp reflections, you just reflect on why you weren't able to get to those things or what happened or what changes you made and why you made those changes. So use my yearly annual calendar to map out my year. And then I do the monthly calendar, similar to Grace, but I like technology. I enjoy putting things on the computer because I can go through and I can erase it and make it all nice and neat for myself to keep myself organized. And again, I go in and I talk about my classroom lessons, my small group lessons, and what I'm going to do and what that's going to look like. So I go in, I start the schedule I use at my school is we are on an A week, B week schedule. So I go in classrooms on B weeks, so I know what I'm going to be working with students, what week I'm going to be going in, and what group of students I'm going to work with on those weeks. I also put in any type of non-counselor duties that I'll be doing during that time, such as multidisciplinary team or attendance intervention team. I include those pieces in there, as well as some weeks that we'll be working with, like Jax Goes to College Week, Red Ribbon Week. And this just helps me plan. It helps me know what I need to do as I prepare for that next month. It helps me be prepared for my next steps. And then I have a weekly calendar. Like Grace, I also submit my weekly calendar to my principal and to my assistant principal. And I also um, outline what I'm going to be working on, what classrooms I'm going to be working with, what small groups I'm going to be working with throughout that course of the week. And it allows them to know what my work is. And it's a great tool of advocacy when we go in and we are able to let our principals, our administrators know what we're doing with our time, which is valuable. Not only does it help us as counselors be prepared for the week, but it also shows the work that we're doing. And that then leads us to the next piece that we have. That's our core lessons. This is where we're going to spend our time going in and that tier one opportunity of teaching the students what, based on our surveys, based on our data, what we need to as school counselors to go in and teach students. So one thing we want to make sure of is that we want to make sure we have behavioral objectives. We want to make sure that our objectives are measurable. We want to make sure that as we are teaching a lesson, that we have an outcome that we can measure, such as I want 80% of the students to be able to explain how to explain a calming strategy that we taught in class today. We need to have those objectives, those measurable objectives each time. We also want to make sure that we have lesson plans. And when we think about the lesson plans, when we submit to RAMP, you want it so that the person who's reading it can understand what you're teaching. You have to sort of paint the picture for them. You have to. It's one of those that if you were a teacher, uh, one of those college type lesson plans where you have to go in and put counselor will do this, student will do this, and it really paints a picture so that the reviewer knows what they're looking at and has a good picture of it. When you think about your lesson plans, you also want to think about, is this a group of lesson plans? Is it just one lesson? And ASCA prefers that it's a group or a unit of lessons so that you can show that growth over time. When you think about small groups, you also need to have a lesson plan for those, and you have to have a minimum of 4 sessions, and the number of students in those groups have to be between 3 and 12. Um, for example, if you have a small group of 6 students for 6 weeks on a certain topic, the thing to remember, and probably the most important piece when it comes to these lessons, is making sure that you have a pre-test and post-test. That data is going to show your effectiveness when working on those topics for small group and those topics for your core lessons. One thing that I like to do when working with those pre-tests and post-tests is I think about grouping it in 3 different categories. I think about the knowledge piece. So that's like some recall. I'm asking students to tell me, well, what's the strategy that we learned? How do you do that strategy? Then when you think about the skills, that's the application piece. So maybe giving them a scenario and asking them, well, what could you do um, based on what we've learned to help to address um, this issue or this behavior or this problem that you're working with, or this example. And then lastly, the attitudes. This is about perception. It's helping them see, okay, did I once thought that this was not important. Now I do think it's important. So addressing each of those 3 things as a pre-test and a post-test is essential for success. Um, we also want to remember this, keep it simple. So one thing that I do is when I do small group lessons and when I do core lessons, if I'm working through a unit, I give a pre-test to start with. Then after the first lesson, I'm going to give them an exit ticket, something short. What's the one big thing that I really want to make sure the students got from that lesson? They'll then complete the exit ticket. That goes back to my objective. Was I successful? If so, I can check it off. Then at the end of that group or at the end of that core lesson unit, I'm then going to give them the post test. I'm going to see, was there growth from the pre-test to the post-test? And I've been measuring that growth every time that I teach a lesson by using those quick exit tickets. Using skills, questions, or statements are great. And we also want to make sure that we connect it always back to our mindsets and behavior. Grace, was there anything you wanted to add to this section?
It's just real important to remember that ASCA, if you're going through RAMP, that ASCA says a small group meets for a minimum of 4 sessions. So if your small group met 3 times, that does not qualify as their small group. So, and to have 3 to 12 students and to be cohesive in what you're teaching. One thing that I do is I have perception. I give a perception survey to all my students in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And then I have that perception data. And as I'm pulling students for small groups or individual counseling or whatever I'm doing, I can, and it's, this is a lengthy perception survey. It has about 15 to 20 statements on it that the students rank from 1 to 5. And so as I'm doing a small group, I can pull from those students' perception surveys to get my pre-data, my data before the group. And then I can give the same survey at the end of the school year or at the end of that group session to see if perception has changed or any knowledge has changed that's on those surveys.
Very good. I like that idea. That's a fantastic idea. Thank you for sharing that. So what we want to do now is we're going to share with you our counseling action plans, and we're going to start with our core counseling action plan just to show you what that looks like and share with you what those lesson plans look like and the results, and then we'll move into a small group. I'll start by sharing mine at this time. So I'm going to share with you a kindergarten example of a lesson, a second grade example of a lesson, and a third grade example of a lesson. So one thing I often hear is, well, how do you give a pre-test for kindergarten? Well, smiley faces and sad faces is an excellent way to do it. For example, in this lesson here, what we're talking about is what's classroom expectations as far as how to be a successful learner. So students, they look at the pictures. I project the pictures up on the screen. This picture, or this one is the children in this picture are paying attention, and the students, if they say yes, they'll circle the happy face. If they say no, they'll circle the sad face. And there's 5 questions on here, and this is the pre-test that I use before teaching this mini unit to my kindergarten students. And then this is their answer sheet. They'll go through and they'll check it off or circle it, and that will let them know, that lets me know, what they understand as we get started. Then as you can see the lesson plan, this is the old lesson plan template. I'll share with you the new template and once we get done presenting. But you can see it's very detailed. It talks about what we're going to do. It allows you to, my learning objectives are outlined there. I want students to be able to evaluate what they should look like when listening, paying attention, asking questions. And I want students to be able to explain what it means to listen and understand. And students will model how to ask a question. And this goes back to those ask a mindsets and behaviors that's connected to it as well. Then, as the lesson goes through, you then have the evaluation piece. So what I want the students to do is I want them to draw a picture of what it would look like if you were following directions like Fuzzy's friends gave him, right? So Fuzzy's a story that we read about, and then the students were giving, let's see, I thought I had a picture of it in there. They were given a example of a blank paper, and they had to draw what it looked like for them um, to be a listener like Fuzzy taught them. This is an example of a second grade pre-test for growth mindset lesson. So we talked about that terminology, that's the knowledge piece. Then we talked about the application, the skill piece. And then we talk about the perception piece, and that gives us understanding there. And there's our lesson plan that goes with teaching that lesson. And then third grade, this is test taking strategies. And we're talking about, this is the pre and post test for that. That includes also the perception data. And here is the detailed lesson plan, including the objectives, the ask a mindsets and behaviors, and then the step-by-step lessons. Again, with the evaluation, what I want the students to be able to do at the end of that lesson. So that those short exit tickets are very, very helpful. It allows you to know what the students understood and what they got. And it allows you to know what you need to go back and refine before you go back and take that post test at the end. And again, this is important for our marketing of what we do. And it's also important for us as counselors so that we know how effective we are being. And when I look at the core counseling lesson plans, let's see here. I think this is where I have picture, I guess not. The other piece that I wanted to share with you is also the action plan piece. And when we look at the action plan, so I think I hyperlinked these 2 wrong ones. That's all right. Grace has her action plan that she can share with you about how she goes through and plans her core curriculum for the year. Grace?
Mhm. So I use the ask a template here. And if you can make that a little bit larger, so
Okay.
yeah, it's kind of tiny. I'm putting the grade level, and my first lesson is what counselors do. So, when you're picking your mindsets and behaviors, you are selecting at least one mindset and at least three behaviors in each section, each domain. So they don't really want you to go over that, not to go over 9 behaviors. And you use those same behaviors over throughout the year because you have a theme for the year and then you use those. So the theme for this year was responsibility. So this lesson was for K-5, the first one, and what counselors do. And I did Hello Bingo, and I used Pete the Pirate. It was Mr. Potato Head and his dressed like a pirate to get to know the using his body parts to tell you what a counselor does. Get to know you Jenga, and telling the students about the chatterbox for the upper grades 3, 4, and 5, where I have a referral box where they can write out a chat referral, their name and what they want to talk about, and they put it in the box, and then I make an appointment for them. And I do this lesson in school starts in August. So in the first 4 weeks of school, I want to cover everybody. So I have about 364 kids at my school. I'm giving the 5th grade the perception survey. And of course, I'm responsible for all of that. And then as I go through my template, this template with my plans for the school year, I am putting all my core lessons. So at my school, I go into each classroom at this time. I was going into the classroom 2 times a month. So every 2 weeks I was in the classroom. So I was able to do a lot of different lessons and on different topics. So you can see kindness and bullying prevention. And I tried to have a bully prevention activity every month. And substance abuse lesson was here. This is during Red Ribbon Week time in October. And you can also see where I have in this lesson on kindness and bully prevention, when I'm doing the activities with Spookly, I'm also linking with one of our community partners. And we have a lot of church partners at my school, and we have some community and business partners that help us at our school. So I like to tie in them for attendance awards and different things that we're working on. So here's some of the key lessons, titles that were kindness and friendship, anger control, and so on. I'm listing the mindsets and behaviors, and it's giving a whole overview of the curriculum I'm using, the time, the number of students that I will see for that lesson, what data I'm using to measure the learning that has taken place, to see what kind of a difference this lesson is making. And it might be discipline referrals, it might be attendance data, it might be conduct grades from the teachers. It might be some, just a variety of different things. And I'll consult as I go with the assistant principal who handles discipline at my school, and I will consult with the teachers as I go. And I also give the teachers surveys too. And usually at the end of the year, I give the teachers teacher surveys of the student needs, or if I'm doing a small group, the teachers can rate the students on behavior, attitude, attendance, respect for peers, respect for authority. And then I will ask the teachers to rate those students again using those same things that I'm looking for, to see if there's changes with those students pertaining to respect or attendance or conduct.
Very good. And so that's the core counseling action plan there. And then once you complete those core counseling lessons, the next thing you want to do is the results report. This is talking about your results of what happened as the results. And Grace highlighted this a moment ago, where you talk about achievement data, you talk about discipline data, and this is my school counseling core curriculum report here. And you always also want to reflect over what is it that was effective about my lesson. What could I do to collect data more accurately? And was my targeted mindsets and behaviors, were those accomplished? And what do I need to change? As counselors, we are always in that opportunity of reflecting and think about, well, this worked and this didn't. So we want to make sure we're doing that. We want to look at that pre and post test. So in my core curriculum, um, template here, I have those exit tickets that I gave the students to complete at the end of each lesson. For example, um, so with the one I was sharing with you about the classroom success skills, 84% of the students were able to draw a picture to illustrate what it looked like to learn. And then as we talk about the pre and post test, so once we got done with that unit on learning, I asked the students, how many of them were able to recognize paying attention. Pre-test, 79%, post-test, 93%. Ask them to identify being a good listener. At the beginning, only 77%, then 100%. So what we want to do is we want to track that change. We want to show that the work that we're doing is making significant change for our students. Here's that lesson, again, that I had shared with you. And here's that picture that I'd asked the students to draw at the end of that exit ticket. And you see in this picture, there's the person, there's the teacher here, and then the person or the student is raising their hand, they're sitting in their seat, and they're at their desk. That's what Fuzzy taught the students that they need to do to be a good listener. So that's what we're looking for, and we're thinking about developmental levels for students with doing that. And there's the pre and post test that I had shared with you a moment ago. And then when looking at the second grade lesson on growth mindset, you can see I asked students to think about, well, what is one thing that you can do to persevere when reading? And what's one thing you can do when persevering in math? And so this student gave an example of saying, well, one thing I can do is I can try again as many times and not give up. And um, for math, they're going to try different strategies. So that's what we're looking for when thinking about what's my effectiveness. Did they get that? Those are the things I taught them about perseverance in that lesson. And then you also want to make sure that you're graphing your results. So you want to graph that perception data, the attitudes. So you can see the results here from my pre-test to post-test, how in each of the area students, they believe that they can change their negative thoughts to positive thoughts, that they can create and achieve goals, that they can learn from their mistakes. Those are the things that I was working towards in the attitude section. And in the knowledge section, students were able to define what growth mindset is. They were able to define what fixed mindset was. In my reflection, one of the things I talked about is that there still wasn't a large percentage of students that were able to define that fixed mindset. So what is it that I was missing in that? Missing in that part of the instruction? I think about recognizing perseverance. One of the things I noticed when I reflected on the post test is that there were two answers that could have possibly been the answer. So I went back and refined that pre and post test to make it more sound, to make it more clear for students. So as we're working through that core curricula, as we're working through um, that reflection piece and graphing the effectiveness of it, it's all about reflecting and thinking about what this is what was effective this time. These are things that I need to continue to work to improve on in those core lessons, because we're always looking for improvement and ways that we can continue to better ourselves as school counselors using the data to find best ways to support our students. And here's Grace's counseling lesson plan that she has. Again, similar to the one that I shared there. And as we mentioned, there are ASCA templates now for you to use. And those ASCA templates you can find on the ASCA website. And I think I like these templates a little more. They're a little more clean there, a little more easier to follow. And I love the new sections that they have in there to really keep everything together and help to drive that instruction. I don't know about you, but for me, I have my own templates that I like to use when I'm planning and working through. And what I normally do is I go back and I'll copy and paste it in these ASCA templates once I have worked through it. So that's also a suggestion for you. If you have something that works for you, then go back and just copy and paste it into these lesson templates, which is helpful. The next piece that we have is small groups. So I'm gonna let Grace start by sharing with you her small group plan.
All right, so this small group, I selected was for behavior. So we had a lot of referrals at our school. So I pulled up all the discipline referrals for the school that were class 1 and class 2. So we have class 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I looked at the students with the most referrals, and they were in grades 3 and 4. So then I selected a group. I selected like 7 students out of it, like started with 10, and then I went down to 7, and then I ended up with selecting 5 students in grades 3 and 4 that their referrals will decrease by 15% from a total of 25 referrals by the end of the third quarter, March 2020, to 19 referrals by the end of the third quarter, March 19, 2021. So I'm looking at these students, and that's going to be my small group, and I'm going to talk with them about behavior and school, and I'm going to target any problems that there might be in the family or in their thinking, or any needs that they might have. I'm just looking for a lot of different things, and then I'm going to work with these students. Okay, you scroll down a little bit, please. So the total number of disciplinary referrals. Okay, so then here's the I targeted lots of different things. So one thing I targeted was attendance and the percentage of days attending school. So here's my 5 students, and I just call them C, B, A, and ZY. So 3 of them were from one grade and 2 of them from another grade. And the number for attendance is their attendance rate, the rate that they attended school. So in quarter 1, you can see the percentages there compared to quarter 2 and quarter 3, and then quarter 4 in the same year. And the baseline was going to be compared to the previous year, 1920 school year. And then this is a graph of that chart, that same exact chart, where I'm looking at the attendance. Okay, and then right here is where I noted, whoops, if you scroll up just a little bit, because this was a COVID year, so I made a reflection right there in my data, up a little bit more. Right there. So I made a reflection right here about COVID-19 causing the problems with attendance and some of the things that I did for that. So I had to work with the truancy officer, I had to work with the social worker, and sometimes we had to provide support for medical, food, and shelter. And our goal was to get students in school or online as quickly as possible. Thank you. You can scroll down a little bit. So here's the interventions that I did for the students. So the small group was students in that was a tier 2 intervention, being in a small group. And as I was working with the students in a small group, the small group actually became ineffective. So I had to rethink like what I was going to be doing with this small group. And 3 of those students on the same grade, I met with them in a lunch bunch. And the other 2, Z and Y, in grade 3, I did not have to meet with them in lunch bunch. But you can see the small group was ineffective because the students were absent often. I had 3 students who were absent often. So you can't have a small group if students aren't going to be there. So that was a problem with getting kids back to school and keeping them at school during this time. So I went to tier 3, which was individual counseling, to help more. And 3 of the students received consistent individual counseling. You can see that as a tier 3 intervention. And then I went into behavior modification and a more intense tier 3, if you will. which I used with 2 students, and 1 student did not need that. So these were some of the things that I was doing to target these students who had the most referrals in the school. Okay, let's keep scrolling there. This is how I looked at their reading scores to see if all of this work that I was doing made any difference in their reading scores. So the chart tells you their reading score, and then the graph tells you how their scores went up. So the blue was the baseline, the orange was the first test they took, and then the gray was the third test they took. And then look at student C. I had discussions about him with his teacher, because how could he score so high on that baseline and then score so low? And we kind of think he did not take this test himself when he took it, because that could not have been a true score for this student. So we're going to keep scrolling down again. So I'm comparing attendance, I'm comparing behavior and intervention, and I'm comparing their reading scores. And then here's the real target that I was looking at, changing the behavior. So these were 5 students with the most referrals in the school that previous year. And blue is for the previous year. And you can see every student except Y went down, but I'll talk with you about why. But see student Z had the most referrals. He had 10 referrals in the school year 1920, but in the school year 2021, he had 0 referrals. So that was a student who went from 10 referrals to 0 referrals. And you can see students C, B, and A, they all went down in the number of referrals they had received for that year. So it just tells you that we can be really effective as counselors and helping kids to make changes and see the changes that they're making. So here's the referral number compared to the referral number for 1920 school year compared to the 2021 school year, which is, I think, is just pretty amazing. So then we're going to, I'll just read this down here. In the school year, Z had the highest number of referrals in the school. This school year, he had 0. All of these were boys. They had less referrals than last year, except Y. Y had very poor attendance. However, his conduct grade improved a whole letter grade. So that was a little crazy too. His conduct grade improved a whole letter grade, even though he only had 2 more referrals than last year. Plus it's a different grade level. So scroll, please. And then this was the percentage of the discipline referrals based on their grade level. So you can see where Z had 45% of all the referrals in his grade, but the next school year he had none. And then, for example, student C had 25% of all the referrals in his grade. So he was 25% of all the referrals just coming from one child. And then C in the next school year had 40%, even though the number for him went down. When the behavior changed for these 5 students who were getting all of these referrals, when their behavior changed, it started to change other behavior too in the classroom, getting things calmed down. So this just explains a little bit about the comparison at the grade level. So I can just read a little bit right here. Last year, Z had 45% of all the referrals in the 3rd grade. And this year he has no referrals for behavior. Referrals dropped for most to all students in our school. And when this group of boys is compared to their peers, 3 of them still show a high rate, C and Y, even though they show improvement in their behavior. When compared to their grade level peers, they still have a high percentage of referrals for their grade level, but the number had gone down. And then here's their conduct grade as reported by their teacher on their report card. So all of them had conduct grades that went up. And so can you scroll to that chart again? That one. So what I'm using is an A is 4 points, a B is 3 points, a C is 2, and so on, to be able to change that to a decimal point instead of a letter grade. And then I made the chart after that, the graph, the bar graph. Everybody improved their conduct grade, so their teachers saw improvements in their behavior. Everybody's conduct grade went up. And this is their core GPA, and core GPA was math, science, social studies, and their language arts. And all of them had a core GPA that went up, except for Z. He went down just a little bit. So we can basically say that's almost like staying the same for him. And then this is a comparison using numbers. We can keep going. And this was about behavior, respect for peers, respect for teachers, and attendance. And the teachers gave them a score in each category out of a total of 25 points. So their baseline score was like 11 or 12 points for B's behavior. And this shows how it changed and how it went up. And there's Z's behavior points, and the red line is his baseline. So improvements were made all around. These were the total referrals for our school. In 2019, over 180 referrals, and for discipline, 2020, there were 81, and 2021 school year, there were 51 total referrals. And this just shows how we use the MTSS process to help with discipline in our school, where all the teachers did these things right here to help with discipline and behavior in our school, which helped, tremendously with the behavior of the students in our school. And this is the same goal written again right here. So revisiting this same goal, the number of class 1 and class 2 discipline referrals for these 5 students will decrease by 15%. And yes, it did. The referrals were reduced by 56% for this group of students. So that far exceeded that goal that was set. And the total number of disciplinary referrals also. When the goal was to go from 68 to 58 total referrals in the school, a decrease by 15%, but our referrals in the school were reduced by 60% school-wide in 1 year.
Very good. That's really cool watching to see how the change that you made there, Grace. Fantastic. So here's an example of the small group action plan. This is my small group action plan, very similar to the core core lesson action plan. Again, you're going to have your grade level, the topics, the behaviors and mindsets. What curriculum? I think one thing to remember when doing small group is making sure you're finding a curriculum that is research-based, something that's going to that is effective. So finding those pieces, and then also having that pre and post test again. And so again, you're going to outline each of your small groups that you're going to work with that school year. You're going to tell the grade level, your targets, what you're going to be working on in that, and then again talking about your achievement, your outcome data, and how you're going to make change and how you're going to show that change that Grace did a wonderful job of displaying in her graphs there. Here's an example of the lesson plan. When you submit your work for RAMP, you will want to have your unit that you're working on to show what you're doing in that small group. Again, the lesson plan template is the same as the one for the core that you're going to be working with, and you're going to be reflecting and thinking about each of those pieces. Also including in any kind of resources that you're using can also paint a picture for the reviewer as they're working to review your RAMP application. So here are the lessons that I used in my small group when doing that. And then again, going back and um, showing the effects that you have on there. The next we have is closing the gap. When we talk about closing the gap, we're talking about finding those things um, that we need to look at systemically to identify barriers. For me, my closing the gap was by June of 2019, the number of students identified through the district's early warning system with 3 or more discipline referrals will decrease by 24%, from 25 students in 17-18 to 19 students in 18-19. And so I targeted these students because there were a few different things. One is that they had multiple early warning indicators. For them, it was discipline referrals. That was the commonality, and also academic. They were behind academically. So I targeted these students because we wanted to close that gap. We wanted to help to say, okay, what's the barrier? So, looking at tiered interventions, I did those tier one lessons on growth mindset, something I had gotten from the information from um, the surveys I had done the year before is that students that they struggled with pushing through and persevering, and as a result, often get behavior that would when something was tough, we'd get a negative behavior. Also, is when students were asked to do something academically. If it was a struggle, they would give up. So we wanted to really push that. So I did those tier one classroom lessons that all students received. Then I pulled these students also in small groups. So I looked to say, well, what is the barrier that the students are having in the small group? So I identified small groups that would work with those students, whether maybe it was emotion control, what to do when I do get upset, or when I do get frustrated when I'm doing my work. Maybe it was self-confidence, some self-esteem lesson, a small group where I worked with students on their self-esteem, helping them see their worth. For others, it was for students to have an extra layer of work in that growth mindset piece of helping them understand that they can continue to stretch their minds and their brains, and that it's all right to make mistakes, and helping them work through those processes. So that was the tier two, and then tier three, I worked with each of those students quarterly. I did a quarterly check-in with them because we said that one of the barriers was referrals and behavior. The other was academics. So we did some goal setting. I created a goal setting sheet for the students, and we also talked about what does that look like. This is the example of the goal setting sheet that I had created for the students for them to reflect on. Okay, am I growing? What does it look like? How am I doing on those PMAs? How am I doing on my reading and my achieve? And we talked about, well, what steps do I need to take? Who are my supports? How can I get help if I need help? What can Mr. Nelson do to support you? What is that you need from me? What is it that you're shutting down? Is it that you're getting frustrated? So these are the things that we worked on, that goal setting piece. And we have I also did pre-assessment, mid-year assessment, post-assessment, talking about did they know how to ask for help? How did they handle their frustrations? I asked them to rate. This is their perception piece. How is their behavior in class? And then we look and compared their thoughts to what they actually had with their behavior grades, and then thinking about what was their outcome when it come to making application. So then you can see, just like with everything else, we want to have the pre-assessment, closing the gap um, charts to show how we created change. And you can see in these charts that in those with those students, we made significant change. We closed lots of gaps in our school that year by working with these 19 students. Um, we showed growth academically, and we also showed significant growth when it come to discipline. These students, they had our most discipline referrals, and from 2017 to 2018 school year, we had over 300 referrals, and we dropped that by over 50%. So huge change happened as a result of working and identifying systemic barriers as well, when working with students, and them sharing with me, okay, these are the things why. We did some education for our teachers. We helped teachers say, okay, what are some things that we could do? We created calm down spaces in our school, in our classroom. We allowed for students to have access and to know who their supports were. All of those were huge things that created big change. Grace, did you want to share anything from your closing the gap piece?
We can just look at it real quick, and
Okay.
I know we have a problem with time, maybe a little bit. So this closing the gap was to target 14 at-risk fifth graders. And again, I used the early warning systems too, looked at student conduct grades and behavior referrals, if the student had been retained or not 1 year, like they were overaged. and reading and math scores and attendance. So you can scroll down. This group was called Fitness and Character Education. It met for 8 weeks or 9 weeks, 8 weeks, I think, 9 weeks. And I had a guest speaker that came in. He was called Coach or Senye, and he came in and he taught the kids a different skill every week. And this is some of the data here shows some of the increases that we saw. So you can scroll, if you scroll, we'll just look at it quickly. So they were all fifth graders, and here's their pre-test and post-test as their teachers completed the pre and post-test and rated their behaviors as they saw them. Okay, you can scroll some more. And this is how it looks as a graph. You can keep going. This was the total growth based on the pre and the post-test. And then the difference. So these are just different ways to present and look at all the data. And this is a breakdown of each of the areas that the teachers were rating them on. You can scroll down. And growth by category for fitness, confidence, effort, and so on. And their quarter 1 and quarter 2 grades, because quarter 1 was the baseline for their grades. And again, like an A was 4, a B was 3, and so on. And here's their conduct grade in the graph, which is much easier to see. And then the conduct grades for each individual student, which we're seeing a lot of growth. Okay, and then their math scores, you can scroll, and that's how it looks as the graph. And then the reading scores, which they made more improvements in math than they did in reading. So that would have to be looked in further. Why is that? So I don't know.
So as you can see, each of those 3 areas, a small group, the core lessons, and the closing the gap, the paperwork is all very similar in it. Again, you're doing pre and post. You're identifying what resources you're going to use, and you're working to identify and to show the work that you're doing and how you're making positive change. Again, ASCA does have a template, the closing the gap action plan and results report, which is important for you to make sure that you use as it comes to ramp. This is this is newer. When we completed ramp, we didn't have this piece, but it is important that you use this for that ramp piece now. And the last piece that we have, we're just going to just briefly go through this, is the reflecting and sharing. This is really important, is because you want to show how the great impact that you're making on students and on your school from those core lessons, from your small group, from the closing the gap work that you're doing. So the best way to do that, one of the best ways to do that, is through your SCAC, your School Counseling Advisory Council. I know in session 2, you guys talked about creating your School Counseling Advisory Council and how to do that effectively. At the end of the year, you want to make sure you come back and you want to share all those results with your SCAC, as well as with everyone that you partner with. So one thing that you do, I'm going to flip through this, is you want to share how many lessons did you do throughout the course of the year. That's something that I have displayed here. You want to talk about referral data. You want to talk about, well, how did change happen? So you can see that from this time period here, there's 19% change, and as we continue working through, we end up getting up to over 50% change from the work that we did there. You can see school-wide data, iReady. So the number of students that met their reading goals, that's looking school-wide, we can see. And then identifying classroom success lessons. So I gave teacher surveys and I asked them to say, how often did you see students using these strategies that I taught when I came into your classroom? And you can see the growth that happened as a result. Also, having the students reflect, how often do you use these strategies? Then I'm going back and looking at the different events that we did during the school year, and how we all were able to partner together to accomplish it. I'm looking at small groups, how many students I was able to work with, how many lessons that took, and and the results of that. And you can see how the outcome data. So this is like the first and second graders. So I break it down by each small group and I show the number of students. So in this group, 6 out of the 7 students, they had 0 referrals. 1 out of the 7 had 3 referrals. So you can see the number. This is the outcome data. 4 out of 7 students showed a full year's growth plus. And then 5 out of 7 showed the growth in math. And then you have that perception data that we show and showcase. And I have that for each of the groups. We have the teacher reflection again, and again, looking at the outcome data for every one of the groups that we work with to show the impact that we make. One of the things we have to do is we have to market ourselves. We have to show the impact that we make on students. And I think that's one of the most beneficial things about RAMP is it gives us the opportunity to showcase the work that we do every single day, and it allows our administrators, it allows our schools, it allows our teachers, it allows our parents, it allows our school boards to know the work that we do and the power of the work that we do when we're able to accomplish it in that partnership. So this is always a fun meeting where we're able to work together and show the positive impact that we make by looking at the goals that we're working on, by working on and also looking at each of those individual groups. Again, the key to it is data. Data tells everything for us. It allows us to show the work that we do, because often the work that we do is unseen. Most people don't see what we do. But as we collect data and as we can see the positive change that happens, we can market ourselves and we can use this to advocate for our position, as well as, most importantly, to continue to create change for our students each day as they come to school and as they continue to embark on their education. Again, there are some Ask a templates that you can now use with your school counseling advisory council. That second semester piece here, the agenda. So this sort of outlines what you can talk about as you go in. So you see the classroom results reports, the small group results reports, and the closing the gap results reports. These are things that you want to make sure you include in. It also has your minutes section for those as well as you capture that and when you talk to your SCAC to help you
And make
reflect and build
sure
on it.
and make sure in your meeting, when you have your advisory council, that somebody is taking minutes, because the minutes will be a part of that in RAM. They will want to see your minutes.
Most certainly, most certainly. Well, that is all that we have for you tonight in regards to those pieces. I know that's a lot of information, a lot of things to look at and to hear over that hour. If you have any questions, Grace and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. And then after that, we also have an evaluation form that we ask that you complete for us. Do we have any questions?
Actually, I do have a question. This is Holly. While I also post the link in the chat, I am curious to know, when you don't have the most what's the word I'm looking for? The best results, let's say. How do you, and I mean, I know that that's part of the reflection. I understand all of that, but I just know that that tends to be a question that I've gotten from, the counselors in my district is, well, then doesn't that mean you failed? And so it doesn't mean that you failed. It maybe means that you've got to dig a little bit deeper into what's going on with your students, or maybe the methods that you used, et cetera. How, if you've experienced that yourself, either you, Josh, or Grace, how have you explained that so that it is a positive and not, and your council, your advisory council, and your principals, et cetera, don't look at it as a negative?
Mhm. Well, just like in the one small group that I started out with 7 students with poor behavior and a lot of disciplinary referrals, the small group kind of fell apart because of attendance. So then I had to divide them up by grade level, and I continued with 3 students instead of 5 students altogether in the group. I divided them as 3 students and 2 students, and then I had to intervene and change it to more individual counseling. But in my documentation and in my reflection, I kept explaining why I did that for this group of students to help with behavior change.
Yeah, I would agree with Grace. I think one of the things that you have to always remember is that we're learning as well, and not all students are the same. So I think one of the things I like to do is ask questions. Is so when I'm faced and I see that students aren't making that progress that I would expect them to be making, I like to start asking questions. I like to ask the students questions like, what's going on? What are the things that's, for example, attendance? That's one of my biggest barriers is working with attendance and helping students get to school. And so, like, so what is it that's going on? And oftentimes, as you uh, dig and ask those questions, it then allows you to um, change your course of play and say, okay, I've got to scrap that idea that's not working. What can I do different? I think that's why it's important also to make sure that you're continuously looking at data. If you just look at data at the beginning and then at the end of the year, you won't know what changes to make. So by having those um, exit tickets at the end of core lessons, at the end of your small group lessons, before you get to that post, that gives you some ideas of what you need to continue to revise. When you're looking at that outcome data and you're saying, okay, well, this student's still continuously missing, the strategy that I'm working with or using or the implementation that I have school wide, there's something that's not working there with this group of students. So then I have to start asking myself, is there something systemic that's causing this to happen? Is there some barriers outside of the student's control that we can work to provide some supports to reduce that barrier for the student? And so it's, I think, being creative, always asking questions, and being willing to change are things that's important for me when I'm faced with that situation.
Yes, and I agree. And don't be afraid to ask those questions. Is there, it could, there could be things at home, things on the bus, things with other students. There could be some things with the teacher, with the curriculum, some things that the student's not getting that you think that he is getting. So there's just a lot of questions to ask and put out there. And also use your resources like your social worker and your community partners that might be able to meet some needs of the family and the student.
Perfect. Thank
I
you.
have a question. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Naomi. I'm from Ocala. I struggle with my yearly calendar. So I'm not sure if anybody else does. And I sit at the beginning of the school year and I plant out everything I want to do, but every day is a constant change. There's so many crises that I don't get to keep up because my calendar is so big. Is there any way you guys can share the calendars that you guys had? I really liked how specific you guys had yours. And I just need something probably to brainstorm from. Is there any way you guys can do that for us? Or for me, I'm not sure if anybody else who attended the training have the same issue that I do,
Sure.
maintaining their calendar, but
I would certainly be glad to share it. And I think as you think about that yearly calendar, so you set that out, you know your plan for the year, but I think that weekly calendar is probably the most important piece of the things that you do, because that sort of sets out some parameters. Just to share with you one thing that um, so I share that with my principal. So now my principal, she uses that calendar that I send out for her weekly schedule, and she shared it with a lot of principals in my district, saying, you know what, this has helped me organize my time. This has helped me to see the things that I need to accomplish. So I'll definitely, I can send you that. It's an Excel sheet that I created there, and you can certainly use that as a template, and we'll be providing these templates for you guys as well. But just put your email, or you can send me an email, and I'll be glad to send it to you.
Yes,
thank you
and
so much.
the same, if you also want a copy of my calendar, I'll send that as well. And I also agree with the importance of the weekly calendar as you're putting in your time and you're saying that you have to deal with a lot of crisis counseling. And your time is used up because you had something planned, but something happened to, so you couldn't work your plan. I always plan my time, like just reading my email, that takes time, and phone calls and consulting with the teachers. And I'll have an hour of time every day blocked out just for that, for email, phone calls, and consultation. Just 1 hour, just off the top for that. And then I'll have time, of course, for my lunchtime blocked out, because even though I have that time blocked out, it still gets interrupted. And I have my time blocked out for lesson planning as well. And those are my plans for my small groups and my individuals and my my core classroom counseling lessons, because it's not just writing the plan, it's preparing all of the things that I'm taking with me, whether the students are coming into, because I have a classroom for an office, so whether they're coming to my classroom or I'm going to theirs, I have to make sure I have all my supplies and everything, because it is 6th grade levels that we're planning for. It takes you have to take that time and block it off in your calendar for planning and for consultation, for email, all those things that you do, they all take time, and put it all in there. Put it all in there in your calendar.
Thank you so much. It just sometimes I feel like I'm the only one.
No, you're not, because there are things I know that happen, and it takes you, like, if you have a crisis at hand, it could be 2 to 3 hours of your whole day. We all know that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions for Josh or Grace? And please just remember to please fill out that survey. I put the link in the chat. I can put the link again in the chat. If you would please take that survey. But again, if anyone has any questions, I know we've gone a little bit over, but we want to make sure everyone gets their any questions they might have answered. And want to also thank Josh and Grace again for being willing to present so much information, a wealth of information. You all are terrific, and we appreciate your time as well as all of our audience's time. So again, any final questions or thoughts from anyone? Thanks, Manya. We appreciate you being here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and any samples, if anybody wants any samples or different parts of that, the RAM graphs and behaviors and things that we talked about, I'll be happy to send you any samples of anything.
Right, just put your email in the chat if you hadn't done that already, please.
So as we end, I think one of the things that's really cool about all the data and stuff is it really shows what we do as school counselors. And this is a great opportunity for us to feel proud of our work. And as you start your endeavors, or as you're finishing your endeavors or ramp, I think that was one of my big motivations in completing ramp, was saying, you know what, we're doing this work. So let's now show the work that we're doing and the positive impact that it has. And it really has has led to a great opportunity as a result of it. It's opened up conversation. It's allowed us to continue to make change. So I encourage you, one, not to be overwhelmed when you look at all of the paperwork and all the pieces that we have here, but to use it as a piece of motivation of saying, you know what, I'm doing this work, I'm creating positive change. So let me now market myself as a school counselor.
Absolutely. We have to be our own biggest fans.
Most certainly.
Okay. Anyone else has any other? We have gotten a couple of emails in the chat, so that's good to for you, Josh and Grace, for both of y'all to share your information. We will be wrapping this up here unless anyone has any additional questions. All right. Well, then again, I thank you, Josh and Grace. Appreciate your time, your expertise, the information that you've shared with us this evening, and want to thank all of our participants for being here, and hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.